السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين. وبعد. The Prophet ﷺ, he informed us in a very well-known hadith, and a hadith which perhaps most have heard, if not all. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَإِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلُحَتْ صَلُحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. He said ﷺ, that there is a morsel of flesh, a piece of flesh in the body. If this morsel of flesh or piece of flesh is upright and sound, the entire body is upright and sound. And if corrupt, the entire body is corrupt. He said, ألا وهي القلب. It is the heart. And from a physiological perspective, it proves to be medically true. If a person has a sound heart, medically, the body generally is sound. But if a person has a sick heart medically, it affects the rest of the body. And today we have become very conscious about the state of our hearts. Perhaps some more than others. We don't eat certain foods. Why? Because we know in the long run it's going to affect our hearts. Or if we do eat them, we eat them in variation. We don't eat too much. We avoid meats sometimes, perhaps, because of the negative impact that meat can have on the heart. Sugars, fats, processed foods, and so on and so forth. In fact, an entire industry now has developed from health consciousness related to the negative impact of food on the heart and the body. So we're aware of the heart and the connection of the heart to the body in relation to health. But do we think about the heart from a non-tangible, spiritual perspective in a similar way? We think about it as a physical piece of the body. What about as a spiritual piece of the body? The way that we consume that which is non-tangible, i.e. that which we consume with our eyes, that which we consume with our ears, that which we consume with our bodies of negativity and positivity, the people that we're around or not around, etc. The places that we frequent. If you frequent bad places, you will constantly be around bad people. Is there an impact upon the body when being around those people, upon the heart? Man, from his nature, he likes to emulate. Surround yourself with positive people and you will start to emulate those positive people. Surround yourself with negative people and you will start to emulate those negative people. The question of nature versus nurture. And the Prophet ﷺ, he informed us. He said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Every person born into this world is born upon the fitrah, the natural state upon which mankind has been created, which is to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand morality. The young person, when he steals the first time, he feels guilty. The young criminal, when starting off in his life of criminality, he feels the impact of his crimes upon his heart. But slowly what happens? Desensitization. He becomes acclimatized to that lifestyle. And the heart starts to become numb. Later on in life it catches up, definitely. But during that time, it becomes numb. And when it does catch up, what happens? Drugs, alcohol, trying to drown out the pain with that which cannot get rid of the pain. But it makes the pain go to the back of the mind. It numbs it out, drowns it out. Likewise, not believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Denying the presence and the existence of your Creator in your life. It's going to lead to pain in the heart. But if you're unaware of what that pain is and the source of that pain, you're going to try to get rid of that pain, that feeling, through other things. And that's where society has arrived at today. That's where the perversions of modern society have come from. The perversions of food, the perversions of sexuality, the perversions of lifestyle. All of them trying to find that which brings comfort to the heart. And the only comfort that can really get rid of that feeling in the heart, the emptiness, the hole, the pain, whatever it might be, the lack of comfort, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But back to the point. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, if the heart is upright, the entire body is upright. And if we were to ask a few questions, what is it that controls the way that we feel? What is it that controls the way that we think? What is it that controls the way that we interact with our external world? We assume that the external world impacts the way that we feel. the way that we think, the way that we interact with it. Someone does something to me that I don't like, I say, he made me angry. He made me upset. He made me do it. Don't make me do it. If something's gone wrong in my life, I feel upset. I feel depressed. I feel down. I see that the cause of my being is the external world. But is that the case? That's the way we're conditioned to think. The way that I think, I assume that my thoughts are my own. If I'm hungry, I say, I am hungry. If the thought of food comes to mind, I am hungry. I don't ask myself, am I actually hungry? Or is it that I've been seeing these advertisements all day long? I've been seeing other people eat all day long, which makes me feel like I'm hungry. But do I really need food? Maybe not. I say to myself, I need a new phone. Do I actually need a new phone? Or is it the way that the external world is making me feel? If you look at simply the phone as an example, what is the function of the phone? To make phone calls, to send messages, nowadays to browse the internet, to use certain apps, etc. Really, when you look at the function, is there a difference between a phone that is released this year and a phone that has been released in the last 5 years or so? Is there a real significant difference? Not really. The camera quality might go up a few megapixels. The speed might increase a few seconds. But really the function remains the same. Likewise, say the same thing about a car. A new model comes out and I say I need a new car. Is that the case? The car you have with 4 wheels, does it get you from point A to point B? Can you take people with you in your car? And so on and so forth. What's the function behind the car? So why is it that we feel we need a new edition of that which we already have? Why is it if I've just eaten lunch, I start to feel hungry and I say I need a snack? I need to graze. Why? Do we consider the relationship of the heart with these things? Our thoughts, which I'm going to come to shortly, inshallah. The topic of mental health, anxiety, depression, OCDs, all of these terms now that people are using. Do we think about the heart when we think about these things? Does the heart have a place to play when we talk about anxiety, being anxious, etc.? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when speaking about the people of Jahannam, He says, وَلَقَدْ ذَرَأْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا وَلَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا وَلَهُمْ آذَانٌ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when speaking about the people of hellfire, He says that we have created from man and from jinn a great number of people who are destined to be from the people of hellfire. What are their signs? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they have hearts with which they do not contemplate and reflect. But when you look at these people, they have hearts. وَلَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. They have eyes, but they do not see with their eyes. And in Arabic, there's a difference between an-nazar and al-basar. An-nazar is to literally see, to look. Al-basar, al-basira is to perceive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying they may see, but they do not perceive. They see the wall, and so they assume, in fact, they are certain that behind the wall there is a bricklayer, perhaps a painter, someone who has designed the wall. But yet they look at the world and they say there is no creator to this world. They see the world, but they cannot perceive the reality of the world. وَلَهُمْ آذَانٌ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. And they have ears, but they do not what? Hear properly. They don't hear correctly. They hear the Quran and they don't reflect. They hear information, but they don't ponder. They don't process. The faculties of processing and perception with these individuals are corrupted. But they have these things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us the issue is not the hearts per se, not the eyes per se, not the ears per se, but it's the ability to properly use these faculties. What's preventing them? And this takes us to the question of what is the qalb? What is the qalb? The ulama of Islam discuss it. What is actually the qalb, the heart, and so on and so forth? Al-aql, intelligence, where is it? What is intelligence? Do I use my mind to think? What controls the mind? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, مَنْ عَمِلَ صَالِحًا مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَلَنُحْيِيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبًا. Those who carry out good deeds of men or women, they are male or female, we are going to give this person a good life. A good life. But then someone may say, look what's happening in Gaza. What's happening in Gaza? You have people that are living according to Islam, praying 5 times a day, perhaps praying qiyam, fasting, reading the Quran, giving everything they have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet they're not living a good life. What's the problem here? The problem is a misunderstanding of what a good life is. What is a good life? We've become conditioned to think a good life is enjoying the niceties and the pleasures. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us differently. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam informed us on Yawm al-Qiyamah, a person who lived the best of lives in this dunya, a life full of pleasure, desire, passion, appetites, physical fulfillment, contentment. This person will be taken and dipped into the hellfire and then asked, did you ever experience anything pleasant in your life? And he will say, La ya Rabb, no, my Lord, I didn't. Why? Because of being dipped in Jahannam just for a second. And a person who had the worst of lives in this life, the worst of lives, didn't experience any good, any tangible, physical good in this life, will be dipped into Jannah and will be asked, did you experience any difficulty? Did you experience any punishment in your life? And he'll say, no, I didn't. Why? From seeing Jannah for a second. The good life is a life which is in the next life. But in living for the next life, it leads to a good life here. How so? Contentment which is internal and has nothing to do with that which you have externally. You can have a person who is rich, wealthy, and they are miserable and depressed. And you can have a person who is poor, impoverished, and they are happy and content. Why? Because happiness and contentment cannot be found in the tangible, in the material. Where is it found? It's found in the heart. And it is born from, according to what we're told in Islam, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which leads to other things. So let's consider some of the issues of mental health that people discuss today. Anxiety. Anxiety, which in brief can be said to be a lack of comfort with the unknown. That which I have no control over. Worry about the outcome of a situation and so on and so forth. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does Islam alleviate and prevent anxiety? A person wakes up in the morning and says to himself, how am I going to pay the bills? The person who has Allah in his life, he knows the one who provided for me up until this point is going to provide for me until I die. Perhaps I won't see that provision anytime soon. I'm trying, but the provision eventually will come. I cannot hasten to that which has not been written, nor can I run away from that which has been written. And what happens in the heart? A person becomes content. A person finds ease. A person begins to rely upon the controller of outcomes rather than trying to control the outcome, him or herself. Likewise, health anxiety. I'm scared if I eat this, I'm going to suffer from this particular disease. If I eat from this type of container, I'm going to suffer from cancer because it's been found that this leads to cancer if used in large amount and so on and so forth. A person that believes in Allah will say what? What has been written has been written. I can't control the outcome. But I follow the framework of Islam in trying to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does Allah say? كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Eat and drink and do not be what? Extravagant in your eating and drinking. And then I rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I can't worry about that which I don't have control over. That's internalized. And what happens? A person starts to feel relief I'm not in control. Likewise, performance anxiety. A person who trains and practices and works hard, but they suffer from anxiety when it comes to performing. They rely upon who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They refer back to the story of Musa alayhi salam. And Musa said, send Harun. He's better than me in speaking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, go, I am with you. I hear and I see. And so the person realizes, Allah is with me. I can only put in the effort. The outcome is with who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, depression. Something which has become quite common in modern society today, especially amongst young men. Why? Where is depression coming from? What leads to depression? If your life is centered around acquirement of this, it's very easy to become depressed. Why? Because not everyone is going to get this. If your life is centered around the acquirement of that which is tangible, of that which is financial, then it's very easy to fall into depression when you don't acquire that which has not been written for you. Likewise, purpose. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, mankind, as a creature that needs purpose. We need to have purpose in our lives. Without purpose, we fall into depression. We fall into depression. Why am I waking up every day? Why am I going to work every day? Why am I looking after my family? What's the point behind it all if I don't have purpose? And with the automation of society, purpose is slowly starting to become lost. Especially for young men, where a big part of purpose for young men previously was to look after a family, to have a family, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, when women are turning around and saying we can look after ourselves, what happens? What's my purpose? But if your purpose transcends these things, I live for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I die for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a purpose that transcends this life. It doesn't mean that you won't fall into sadness, but you will not be afflicted with the types of depression that we're seeing amongst young men today, amongst young women today. You have a purpose, which is what? To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you look at life as a test, as a test. And you understand that a test is supposed to be difficult. So when difficulty comes, I don't feel sad. I don't feel aggrieved. I understand this is life. This is life. Life is hard. Life is difficult because life is a test. And when I leave this life, hopefully I've passed that test, and that's when happiness comes. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Jannah throughout the Quran. How many times? If you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, would you say that the Prophet ﷺ led a happy life? I.e. the happiness that we're sold today, smiles and jumping around and laughter and pleasure and excitement. Is that really happy? The Prophet ﷺ didn't lead such a life. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew death. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew migration. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew what it felt like to be kicked out of your town, to be rejected by people. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew the loss of life in his family, his companions, his friends. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew poverty. The Prophet ﷺ, he accustomed himself to not having food. He knew hunger. He knew thirst. And if we were to look at his life according to our standards today, we would say that's a life that we don't want. Why? Because we've been conditioned to look for the pleasures, the niceties, physical fulfillment, and so on and so forth. That wasn't the life of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you knew what I knew, you would laugh little and cry a lot. But the difference is the outlook on life. What's the purpose behind life? What's the purpose? If you see life as a test, you're going to be patient on the lows and the highs, and you're going to be consistent throughout all of them. But if you have no purpose, if you don't know that life is a test, it's easy to wake up and say, what's the point? Why am I doing this? What do I do with my life? And you can be sold a nightmare that looks like a dream, which is you're going to be happy the more of this life that you have, and you start to chase after it. You start to chase after it and run after it. Halal, haram, it doesn't matter. Until you wake up one day and you say, I've got everything, but I still feel depressed. I still feel low. I still feel an empty heart. And then the alcohol comes along. The drugs come along. Perhaps the women or the men, depending on your gender. The indulgence. And indulgence leads to what? Perversion. Why? Because the more you have of something, you need to have something else now. It's not stimulating anymore. And then it gets to a point where you can't consume anything else. There's nothing else. And that's where we have what we see amongst celebrities, what we see amongst the wealthy, what we see amongst those who we perceive to have made it. Suicide. I've got everything and I still feel the same. And likewise, a common issue, OCDs, obsessive compulsive disorders. Similar to anxiety, the assumption that I am responsible for something that I'm not responsible for. And that becomes obsessive and it becomes compulsive. I have to act on that which I obsess over, assuming responsibility for it. But if I turn this affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm relieved. It's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you read through the Quran and you internalize the Quran will tell you all of these things. And the Quran will shape your heart and condition your heart to see life from a different perspective, from the perspective that we should be seeing life, rather than the perspective that we've been conditioned to see life from today. Because we are, as is said in Arabic, al-mar'u ibnu asrihi. We are the sons and daughters of our time. It's not only our parents that have raised us, it's society, it's social media, it's films, it's TV, it's sports, it's our schools, our colleges, our universities, our colleagues. It's the public places that we frequent. They condition us. And if you look to the way society is thinking and acting, it's very likely that you think and act in a similar way. And so recalibrating our hearts and understanding that the heart is the real source of happiness and contentment in our lives, the real source of peace and tranquility in our lives. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. It is by the reflection and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that hearts find tranquility. Then our lives start to change. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has charged us with responsibility. First, we have our individual responsibilities, and the first and foremost responsibility is the responsibility of self. The responsibility of self. If you are correct in the way you deal with that responsibility, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with the best of this life and the best of the next life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the mu'minun in the Quran in multiple places as the people of falah. And falah is khayrud dunya wal akhirah, the best of this life and the next life. Those who have the best of this life and the next life. But you cannot describe, you cannot understand something, you cannot describe it to someone who has not himself or herself tasted it, and you cannot understand it until you yourself taste it. And so until a person embraces seeking the pleasure of Allah over seeking the pleasure of the body, a person will not understand it. It's like trying to describe that which takes place in a marriage to someone who is unmarried. It's impossible for them to understand. You can try and you will not get the message across. Trying to understand a river to someone who has never seen water, impossible. And then collectively, we have our collective responsibility. Our collective responsibility to establish that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth after having established it in our own individual lives. If we do so, the earth becomes a place which is perhaps an enjoyable place. The earth becomes a place of happiness and contentment for its inhabitants. It happens first in the self, and then when the they establish it as a collective, it becomes something for the collective. And what we're seeing today take place in the world is a consequence of us as individuals not establishing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure in our own lives, and then not standing together to establish that which is pleasing to Allah on this earth as a collective. And we have to understand this point, and we have to internalize this point. How many, for example, marriages break down because of a lack of application of Islam in the marriage? The man wants to follow his desires, the woman wants to follow her desires, and what happens? The marriage breaks down. How many relationships between siblings or parents and children break down because of a lack of application of Islam in the family life? Likewise, say the same in society. Think about backbiting. Think about gossiping. How many issues would we not have if we weren't to engage in backbiting and gossiping? And qila wa qal, he said, she said. Think of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, la taghdab, do not become angry. How many lives would not have been taken if the taker had controlled his anger? How many young men and perhaps young women would not be imprisoned today if they had the ability to control their anger? But we're not raised to think like that. We're not conditioned to apply ourselves like that. Why? Because we are not applying Islam as individuals and then collectively. And so this khutbah, the point of the khutbah is not to come and to listen and to say, nice khutbah, mashallah, and leave the masjid and nothing changes. No, the point is to come to realize that I have been reminded and I am going to be questioned on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Every single person here is going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be questioned. You were told, if you apply Islam in your life will change. If you do not apply Islam in your life, you will have problems in your life. You will be asked and you will be told. I will be questioned. You told the people, if you apply Islam in your life, you will have a good life. Did you apply Islam in your own life? The khutbah is not merely a ritual. It's not something to attend and get out of the way, or to attend and to say nice speech, mashallah, and leave, and that's it. No, there is significance behind the khutbah every single Friday. And so we have to think about what is happening. Right now, the International Court of Justice is giving its response to the hearing, perhaps indicating that Israel has committed genocide, perhaps going to dismiss it. Allah knows best. As Muslims, though, we don't rely upon international courts of justice. As Muslims, we don't rely upon external bodies. As Muslims, we rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then rely upon ourselves to change our situation. No person is going to come and take my hand and change my situation. I have to stand up and change my situation for myself. And that's a part of being a man. And if we want young men of Islam, then this has to be something that we condition ourselves to understand. That we are responsible for the situation we find ourselves in and we need to change it. As for international courts and bodies and so on and so forth, the benefit of those things, it's a moral victory perhaps. In a time where the Muslims are looking for moral victories because we feel so downtrodden. And it's a blemish on the blackened history of the state of Israel. It's a blemish. But our ummah, we have been through situations like this before. This is not the first time we've dealt with an external body. It's not the first time we have dealt with difficulty. Every single time we have been through a situation like this, the solution has always been the same. What's that solution? Application of Islam from within. Revival of Islam from within. Change has never come because an external non-Muslim body has come and said, we're going to support you and we're going to help you to establish that which you need to establish. Never happened in our history. It's always been from inside, from within us. And so we have to wake up. And we have to make the changes individually and collectively. individually and collectively. Otherwise, our situation is going to continue. And our problems are going to worsen. And the bloodshed is going to increase. And the displaced are going to continue to be displaced. In fact, the number is going to get larger. And what's going to happen? Eventually, the problems are going to knock on our front doors. They're going to knock on our front doors. Because we didn't take action when we had the opportunity to take action. And then we're going to cry. And then perhaps we're going to ask, who's going to save us? Who's going to help us? When we had the opportunity to help and save ourselves, did we take it? We have that opportunity now. So now is the time to take the opportunity. Return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Apply Islam in our lives. Stop engaging in the haram, because your haram makes a difference. My haram makes a difference. Apply the halal. And start to apply Islam. For the young brothers and sisters, start to learn your deen. Start to learn your deen. Make Islam your culture. Make Islam your philosophy. Make Islam your way of life. Shun everything else. Because time is running out. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use us and not replace us. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma arda an Abi Bakr wa an Umar wa an Uthman wa an Ali wa an sa'ir sahabati ajma'in. Allahumma tub alayna wa'afu anna ya Rabbal alameen. Allahumma arzuqna an na'isha hayatan tayyibah innaka mujib ad-da'awat. اللهم ردنا إلى دينك ردا جميلا يا رب العالمين. اللهم رد الشباب إلى الإسلام ردا جميلا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر إخواننا في فلسطين. اللهم انصر المسلمين في أنحاء العالم يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصرهم نصرا مؤزرا. اللهم ارفع رايتهم. اللهم سدد قلوبهم. اللهم وفقهم يا مجيب الدعوات واستعملنا في نصرتهم ولا تستبدلنا وأقم الصلاة. After the prayer, please don't leave, as we have two brothers that are going to take the shahada inshallah at the front after the salah inshallah.